alchemical examination, by which, as by a touchstone, the adept is distinguished from the sophist, and the true philosopher from the impostor, established for the benefit of nobles and of those who, due to a lack of extensive reading and volcanic, i.e., laboratory, experience, do not fully understand the chemical point, lest they be so shamefully deceived by those most depraved smoke-sellers and boastful impostors. To the disgrace of the art, which is purely divine. A necessary and most profitable little work, such as has never before been published in print since the creation of the world. By the author Pantaleon, an adept of Hermetic wisdom. Available in Nuremberg. 1676. To the one who hates alchemy. To laugh without cause and to criticize what is unknown is, according to the common saying, a sign of foolishness and arrogance. By much laughter you shall know the fool. Likewise, no one hates an art unless he is ignorant of it. Therefore, whoever intends either to love or reject any art should first learn it, and then judge it. That gnats and butterflies perish near a burning candle is due to the folly of those creatures, which does not take away the very useful function of the light. To the Most High Prince and Lord Charles of Liechtenstein, etc., etc. My most gracious Prince and Lord. The author dedicates and offers this work. Most High Prince, most gracious Lord, I recently ventured to lay before your Highness the first beginnings and foundation of the Hermetic art, as to a patron of this divine science, not without notable boldness on my part, arising solely from a natural inclination toward your Highness. Indeed, Christian charity compelled me, along with the privilege of divine illumination, to aid, to the best of my ability, one who runs the course with equal zeal. Your Highness has thus far been bound by love for divine wisdom, with eternal praise, but since God, the source of all wisdom, acts in nothing directly, and the devil, his sworn enemy, leaves no attempt untried by which he might weary, confuse, and entirely distract a soul desirous of wisdom. I therefore resolved to place my received talent at interest, and to play the part of an instrument. To that end, I had prepared my Hermetic tomb. Since the journey I have undertaken cannot be happily completed without a faithful achates, i.e., a loyal companion, I therefore present this little treatise for consideration by both the eyes and the mind. Who and of what sort, among so many contenders, ought to be chosen, or not? If I act upon what is already known, I confirm it. If I teach what is unknown, I deserve merit. If neither, I ask that your Highness graciously illuminate this sketch with the same favor as the dignity of the subject matter demands. I do not contend with words, but with facts, otherwise I would produce scholastic ornaments of speech and smear over my truth with them. But since noble minds can easily distinguish substance from shadow, I prefer more earnestly to demonstrate in reality rather than in mere words, that I am your Highness's most humbly obedient servant, Pantaleon. Prologue. That this entire system of the world has arisen from opposites uniting into one thing, and that it continues perpetually to contend in a certain ordered way, this the Peripatetic school has long since taught and passed down to our time. Whether, however, this struggle originally derives from the design of the supremely good Creator, let it be free for each, according to his own judgment, to determine. We, for our part, subject, of course, to the judgment of the Church, believe that those who deny this are in error, especially when the very movement of the heavens speaks otherwise, a movement which, from the first moment of creation, has never altered. Light and darkness, introduced on the first day of the world, are witnesses, as are motion and stillness in bodies, opposition in many forms, truth and falsehood, good and evil. All these are so necessary to the beauty of the universe that they cannot be removed without inflicting notable mutilation upon it. The human mind indeed, so long as it held dominion within man, did not know duality, not because it was not truly present, but because it could not operate, being subject to the senses. But after the transgression, the eternal mind was darkened and became explicitly directed toward the sensory realm, and by an inevitable necessity, the true unity of things was banished and deceptive multiplicity was introduced. This same diversity is also now required for the beauty of the microcosm, the human being, in its current state, a fact easily grasped by one who knows that diverse actions also require diverse agents. Let us not leap into another man's field, but rather remain in the arena of natural things, where athletes of different and even opposing natures display their combat. One fights with a wooden sword, another with leaden missiles, another with a rusted blade. Many carry straw bundles like buffoons in place of helmets, ridiculously striving to storm nature's most fortified citadel. Not a few demand its surrender with nothing more than shouting and threats. Rarely, indeed, most rarely, is one found equipped with a drawn sword. All those poorly armed fighters, once they see themselves defeated without result, return home and blame the inaccessibility of the place. But so they do not appear to despair, they invent new kinds of engines and begin preparatory studies anew. Let what can be done, yet let us receive our daily wage, each according to his rank of honor. But meanwhile, as the proverb goes, bats sing out of tune. Though strength may be lacking, the will is still to be praised. Thus the siege is lifted, as the soldiers themselves withdraw to their winter quarters, and there, they rejoice. They then once more take to the field with honorable clamor and resume the siege, clad in foreign arms, until at last they either succumb to reality itself or are dismissed by their patron, either because he is exhausted or has grown weary. When the campaign is over, they depart ill-tempered and dull-witted, failing to recognize their own ineptitude, they cast blame here and there, seek a new leader, and attempt by sheer will what they themselves could not accomplish. The more conscientious ones, having given the matter more thoughtful consideration, discourage others from such warfare, even if ineptly, and instead prefer peace. Yet both groups fail to observe that access granted to gold-laden men makes any fortress vulnerable, especially one that is materially constructed of gold, and thus not so easily obscured by that which is like unto itself. I mean to say this, Hermetic study sets before itself the conquest of a fortress, namely gold, naturally eternal and incorruptible, but the soldiers are vastly diverse. Into the siege are admitted servants both learned and ignorant, wise and foolish, experienced and unskilled, truthful and deceitful. Among the great lords, such a multitude is abundantly to be seen. For princes, driven by a noble and long-standing affection for this royal art, are often, by reason of the delicacy of their station and the demands of household oversight, rarely inclined to descend into the matter themselves, much less to undertake, with their own hands, the analysis of natural substances. From which it follows that they are compelled to make up for this deficiency by the industry and insight of others. How selectively and exquisitely they are so often deceived, day by day, alas, becomes ever more evident, and with it, the intolerable calamity that has befallen the whole art. For scarcely is there a single princely court in all Europe where alchemy still enjoys a good reputation. Therefore, lest this divine science be treated with such ongoing injustice, while the noble patrons and protectors of it are themselves disgracefully deceived, I have composed this little treatise, drawn from the light of nature and personal observation, autopsia, so that it might serve them in place of the touchstone. For we firmly hold this. Whoever either does not understand or despises the spirit of this examination is immediately to be called an artificer. Let him be either an unskilled novice or a fraud. And whatever profession, be it specific or general, that does not agree with our foundation is vain and deceitful, no matter how grand it may appear outwardly. For there is, and never shall be, nothing in the fire that remains, save only the humble mercurial metallic substance, homogeneous, whether brought forth by art or nature, as is abundantly attested by Geber, Arnoldus, Bernardus, and all rightly discerning and learned philosophers. And if anyone finds our truth plain and unadorned, let him instead embrace her handmaid, variegated falsehood, and be on his way. It is no wonder that a harlot is more highly prized than an honest matron. For truth has been hated from the very first moment of time, partly because, like the daughter of the Most High, confident in her nobility, she scorns all colors and foreign recommendations, partly also because men, by their very nature, love more the brilliant deceptions of cunning and clever lies than the uncultivated and naked truth. On the other hand, Satan promotes his offspring, lies, painted and disguised in many forms, everywhere, such that they are rightly received into the axioms of the world. The one true truth demands more patrons and recommendations to be heard than all the impostures and grossest falsehoods. Yet, despite these thorns, I have here presented the physical truth in a concise form for the nobles, so that they might finally attain the fulfillment of their wishes and no longer rend the celestial art with insults. Let him who can grasp it, grasp it. This is not written for all, but for those whom virtue has carried to the heights of heaven. Let whoever believes, believe. The coming age will reveal what it is and what it has been. Pi nu tau alpha lambda sigma iota nu, everything resolves. Chapter 1. Those who derive the word alchemy from the Greek term lambda, salt, and chiupsilon, to pour, improperly attribute it to the Hermetic art because this art does not aim to work primarily with salts, but rather with metals. No metal admits into its natural composition any salt, just as genuine analysis promises nothing that truly smells of salt, and it is only made from mercury, arsenic, and sulfur, as Geber and all the sounder philosophers testify. However, the liquid known as alkahest, which is said to dissolve metals, may produce a salt-like substance from metals, but it must be understood that the salt-like is not the same as the true salt. For all salts give a taste, either acidic, salty, or a mixture of both. But nothing of the sort is found in metals by themselves, even though they may exhibit a certain form of salt, just as the destructive liquid, called the fire of Gehenna by Helmont, shows the form of niter, yet it is tasteless and without salt. If, however, someone, through addition, forces metals into salts and prefers to call this spagyric work alchemy, it remains alchemy for him, but to us, it is too precious. In this sense, some witticism has not unreasonably defined alchemy as an art without art, whose beginning is to lie, its middle to labor, and its end to beg. But those who take this term not in its strict sense but in a broader one, and seek a less principal meaning, consider it nobler, for from salts is the principle and entrance. Without salt, the gates of the Hermetic heaven are not opened, as philosophers universally affirm. Therefore, we define spagyric art, which is called by one word alchemy, as the art of improving inferior metals and raising them to the state of the sun or the moon. The subject of this art is all metal. The object is tincture. The end is gold. Now, because both the starting and ending points, as correlates, are contained under one category, it necessarily follows that the subject of the transmutative art, along with its end, must belong to the same category, as is also suggested by the rule of the ancient sages. From the end of any intention results its beginning. Furthermore, the origin of something's principle depends on the same thing in which its increments end. Thus, Sendivogius teaches, if you wish to make metals, your beginning should be metal, for metals are made through metals. And Riplius in the 12th gate, gold and silver should not be sought outside their form. Also in his book on Mercury and the Philosopher's Stone. Therefore, unite form with form and genus with genus, and do not allow one without the other, nor anything of opposites that lies outside the proper form and genus. Here, he speaks of form, not because metals essentially differ from one another, but only through heating and incidentally. Therefore, the more learned individuals, unable to palliate the nausea caused by the metallic mercury, have prostituted themselves to future generations and spread it in writing, claiming that the mercury of the common people, however it is treated, cannot become philosophical, which is ridiculous and wholly false, for there is only one unique mercury in all of metallic and mineral nature, but it differs significantly from itself only accidentally, due to purity. Thus, whatever metal or mineral is drawn out, except for the sun, is heterogeneous and requires philosophical preparation, as Sendivogius admits in his dialogue, when Mercury himself speaks in an apophatic manner, "My heart is always most pure, but my clothes are the dirtiest." And if these incredulous Thomists would only see once how our subject is transferred by philosophical preparation, they would immediately conclude that such tiresome labors were not undertaken in vain by our ancestors, and that the third arsenical element, separated from the core of Mercury, is the sole and unique cause for its inability to unite radically with the sun, but rather it is precipitated into a red powder by a greater fire. I have cited this method of preparing mercury in two ways, from Geber and Bernhard, in my Hermetic Tomb, which philosopher, through fire, needs no further clarification. Here, I write to the magnates, who rarely lift a finger but aim to tread the Colchian path with another's toil, it suffices to know that 1. The subject of alchemy, or philosophical mercury, is of metallic genus. Whether it is taken from one or more metals matters not, for in philosophical preparation, aside from simple and pure unity, nothing remains specific. 2. That it is homogeneous, purged of all sulphurous and arsenical stain. 3. That it is double, one that moistens and one that does not, or liquid and running. 4. That it provides a hard amalgam, which, when exposed to fire, immediately softens again until it departs as pure mercury. And 5. That the arsenical sulfuric earth must be separated in great quantity and never be artificially reduced back into mercury form. From these points, I believe it is clear enough what alchemy is and what its subject is. Whoever has not yet grasped the truth of the matter, but still doubts, is left searching for a naked reed in the marsh. Chapter 2. Having now established the subject of the transmutational art, as its principal part, the next step is to address the object, which is the tincture itself. This is more precisely defined as, a metallic tincture is nothing else but the sulfur of gold, exalted in its mercury through a proper digestion. Regarding this definition, a significant question arises, whether gold is a body simply homogeneous or homogeneous with respect to a certain quality? To clarify this question, a fundamental understanding of mercury is required, for gold is nothing else but mercury that has been cooked and thickened by the heat of its internal sulfur, assisted by external moderation. Therefore, it is to be understood. 1. That the common mercury, and any such material mercury, consists solely of elemental water, and this whole composition is nothing but the union of water and fire. The reason for this is that it is resolved again by a great fire, through the destruction of the astral seed of fire, or by its counterpart, the element of water. As can be seen in the writings of Louis de Combite and Helmont, 2 men of exceptional repute, the latter often complains of the loss and destruction of his alcohol liquid by its counterpart. The former, however, admits explicitly that the very liquid, which is nothing but homogeneous mercury, is extracted into water and destroyed in a moment by the addition of common elemental water, turning it into the same elemental water, with a certain sharp sulphurous fat floating above, although it is eternal in itself and unaffected by anything else. 2. It should be noted that the essential form of mercury internally is analogous to the astral element, which is of a fiery nature. For the celestial bodies continually cast their fiery rays toward the center of the earth. From there, reflected through the earth without interruption, they ascend again and, passing through bodies of the aqueous element, are coagulated. From this coagulation arises the marvelous first metal, which we call mercury. This is then further dispersed and cooked by internal heat. Thus, deeper in the earth, the secondary minerals are more abundant than on the surface, because the heat there is stronger and, consequently, more waste is separated. Through this alone, with the accompanying heat, mercury is transformed into gold. However, much heterogeneous impurity is mixed into this coagulation, which happens by accident, beyond the intention of the agent, although it does contribute significantly to the coagulation and thus is willingly accepted. The weight of mercury, therefore, either arises from its mercurial seed's idiosyncrasy or from the thickening and contraction of water. The latter is more probable, for weight must arise from some body of equal weight, because nothing can be drawn from nothing. Therefore, elemental water coagulates, with a special astral sulfur, into an opaque and heavy body, called quicksilver. This is then, through further digestion and the removal of excesses, transformed into gold, as the ultimate end of the metallic nature, in the following manner. In metallic mercury lies external fire around it, in the earth, and similarly is the actual heat, which is nothing else but an atom of fiery sulfur, abundant in the minerals. Now, since celestial and terrestrial fire are of one nature, and like attracts like, this external heat gradually associates with the mercurial sulfur and assumes a body within it. And as this happens, the remaining coarse terrestrial sulfur, which sought affinity with it for the same reason, is separated. After a long time, once completely separated, the whitest nucleus of mercury, heated by pure fire, is coagulated into the body of fire and heat. From this, it follows that gold, in relation to other imperfect metals, is homogeneous. However, in relation to mercury, it is not homogeneous, because it contains more of the corporeal fire than does the homogeneous quicksilver, whether made by art or nature. Since this actual heat, concentrated in the sulfur of mercury and made corporeal, is external and not united so intimately with the aqueous material of Mercury's body, it follows that the sulfur of Mercury can essentially be separated, sometimes with, sometimes without the destruction of the solar body, which may seem paradoxical to many, although it is true. That fire can become corporeal in a certain material and increase weight is evident from the incineration of antimony regulus with burning glass. I do not wish to be lengthy, for I could bring up all of antiquity to support my opinion. Let us then return to our object, the tincture, which without any doubt is formed from gold and homogeneous liquid mercury, or running mercury, with nothing else added. Otherwise, the homogeneity of both would not be so essential, as Arnoldus strongly emphasizes at the end of his Rosarium, stating, "Do not introduce into the stone either water, powder, or any other substance, for that which is not born from it cannot enter it. In fact, if anything foreign is added, it is immediately destroyed and does not become that which is sought." To further safeguard the broad definition of the tincture, it must be explained how the sulfur of gold, from nature, is exalted and multiplied in the cold mercury of the golden body. This occurs in the following manner. When the pure body of gold, joined with volatile, homogeneous gold made by art in the proper proportion, unites, the volatile begins to penetrate the fixed and equalize with it, through two means, greater fineness and quantity. However, since this is not achieved through heat, the ancient tale plays out and gradually insinuates itself towards its end. It adds an ancient sulfur that did not exist previously, increasing it not so much by quantity but by quality, without regard to the density of glass or the penetration of dimensions due to its extreme subtlety. Hence, the philosophers also called their stone, or tincture, the son of fire and the stone of fire, because it efficiently and effectively proceeds from the same source. From these foundational premises, it follows that there are only two types of transmutation in all of metallic nature. One is natural, the removal of the superfluous by cooking, the other is artistic, and it occurs through the illumination of the entire mercurial part in metals. The difference lies in this: nature alters only the homogeneous point in mercury, but art illuminates the entire mercurial body, without the separation of the superfluous, with the ineffable light of the true tincture, and transforms it into a more dignified state. The reason for the difference is that the alteration of nature, due to the weakness of the agent, is completed progressively over a long period of time, whereas the transmutation of art occurs in a moment by the mode of illumination. For what light does when dispersed, it also does when concentrated and fixed, in the proper material. This illumination apprehends both the pure and the impure in the mercurial body, due to its excellence and incredible subtlety, and the impure substance, which relates to the pure core of watery mercury as earth, although it is materially more composed of water, is illuminated like lightning, and it moves towards this purity of purity, helped, albeit somewhat, by the radical mixture of both. Thus, in the future, such artificial gold will, through artificial retrogradation, form the same homogeneous mercury, as it does with natural gold. I wish to clarify this mysterious act by induction, using a contrary example, as follows: if it is possible that coarse and arsenical sulfur, without mixture, can extract, displace, and change that impure earthy part of mercury, which originally and centrally was united with the rest of the aqueous core in mercury, and is born from one and the same element, in almost a moment, and transform it into the most fixed, irreducible earth, it follows that, because the same principle applies to opposites, although differently, pure, celestial sulfur, highly illuminative and subtle, with the mixture of its sulfurous mercurial body, can reduce that impure substance, restore it to its aqueous element, and further transform it. Indeed, the restoration and conservation of a similar thing is far easier than the transmutation of a similar thing into a dissimilar one. And yet the first is true, and therefore the latter also follows. The first is demonstrated every day, mechanically, with force, but the second is well known everywhere through frequent transmutations of common mercury into refined gold, without changing mercury in weight. Chapter 3. After considering the object of the hermetic art, we must next consider its ultimate goal, namely gold. However, since this has already been sufficiently explained above, we add nothing more, except to briefly note that if gold leaves are chosen for amalgamation, common ones should not be used, as they are mixed with copper or silver, which would harm the entire work. Indeed, there is another gold, called the philosopher's gold, which is highly praised by them. However, it differs greatly from natural gold, not in essence, but in fixity. For it is nothing other than coagulated Sophic mercury. This gold is considered by the philosophers to be most suitable for their brief and secret work, as Geber suggests, if you perfect it from mercury alone, you will be a seeker of the most precious mastery. Since the aforementioned analogical gold is not the ultimate goal of our alchemy, we cease to add more. Here the most just reader has all that knowledge which ennobles the true philosopher and separates him from the vile filth of common alchemists, who know it not only theoretically but also practically. The adept is called the complete philosopher and the physician of human and metallic nature. Of this alone, Hippocrates' saying is true, the physician is the man who is master of many people. The physician is incomparable. Now, when opposites are placed next to each other, they shine more brightly. It is also necessary to delineate what the pseudo-philosophers, the common alchemists, promise and how they establish their transmutation. Since they are usually ignorant and incorrigible, of every kind of malicious people, the well-known distich explains them well. They pretend to be chemists, the layman, the priest, the monk, the soldier, the actor, the barber, the old woman. Therefore, not observing any method, like drunken men, they rush into the mineral mines, taking whatever they find, and thinking to themselves, I do not know what, and I do not know what. Indeed, they all imagine a good end or goal for themselves and are delighted by it, but because they do not know the beginning, they do not find the end. Chapter 4. But in order to deal honorably with these sycophants, it pleases me to establish a comparison between the patchwork of pseudo-philosophers and the singular and simple subject of the adepts, which in the truest truth is the mercurial, metallic, and homogeneous substance. The immediate subject of the alchemists, some years ago, was vitriol in its entire substance. They purified it, sweetened it, and, may God turn it to good, they brought it through all the colors to the form of transparent ruby. The object they obtained was indeed tincture for fabrics, but not for metals, and the end they sought in place of gold was copper. And lest they be seen to have fallen without reason and the authority of the ancients, they interpreted that saying, by visiting the interior of the earth, you will find there the hidden stone, the true medicine, through the initial letters, producing vitriol, interpreting it as common vitriol. But because no effect followed, they placed the blame entirely on the vitriol, the first substance of gold, insufficiently impregnated. Therefore, they sought another patron, and they themselves escaped the responsibility. This was followed by antimony, derived from them, from the Greek nu tau mu omicron nu iota mu omicron nu, the flower of all our metals. Now they thought they had grasped the hair and, along with the name, the thing itself, in accordance with the verse. Things often fit their names. Therefore, they sought, above all, its golden part, namely, the golden sulfur, sometimes from lixiviates through precipitation, sometimes from glass through the extraction of various stalagmites, and they admired its heat to the point of madness. They fixed it by itself and with additions to facilitate the ingress, and they claimed that the moon or precipitated mercury clothed it. Indeed, they based this on the foundation that Basil Valentine and others said, the sun is purified by antimony, because it is of its blood. Therefore, it would not be inappropriate if they extracted this blood and infused it into the moon. Others made this sulfur volatile, so that it would assume the nature of a spirit. They had heard, indeed, that the philosophers call their mercury a subtle and penetrating spirit, for otherwise, fixed gold could not penetrate and subtilize. Others macerated this subject in different ways, each according to their own method, until finally, all they found was useless dross and an untouched moon. Few were so fortunate as to think that if anything good and metallic lay hidden in antimony, it should be sought in its mercury as the purer part, but even if they had known this, very few learned to separate it up until this day. Then they fell into the use of common arsenic, and from it, they sometimes produced a ruby, sometimes a molten mercury, and similar masks, preparing them and finding as the end, at times, the very extinction of the vital air. Lest such a treasure be hidden from posterity by one of these sophists, a Pole by nationality, published an excellent treatise in Paris on this subject under the title, Philosophical Stone. Native marcasite and cinnabar also did not remain untried, for they know how to extract a marvelous mercurial water and almost golden mercury from these, which tints a silver spoon with yellow heat, and then, as with the sun, they cook it with the sun and finally sell the gold unchanged after a whole year. About 20 years ago, an anonymous author, named Agricola Major and Minor, published a beautiful yet most secret work on the philosopher's Saturn, and here he mixed the common Saturn or with the philosophical one, with admirable effect. Indeed, it is almost impossible to describe the clamor at that time concerning the Saturn or in almost every laboratory. This person knew how to extract the whitest soul, that one the most ruddy, with vinegar and other liquids. In a word, the universal masterwork was being prepared from this ore, on paper, because it could not endure fire. How miserably everyone was deceived is well known. What shall I say about Mars? Here, certainly, is a vigorous warrior, under whom many alchemists perished. He is easily wounded and sheds blood, but since his life does not lie in his blood, but in a juice similar to mercury, which he guards much more tightly than pitch guards its gold, it was far from infusing life into the moon, and rather, they would have made it sick and melancholic with this abundant Martian blood, and truly experienced Galen's dictum. The simple thing about medicine is weak. The chest, life, is the blood, foolish and simple is it from too much blood. I indeed concede that iron is rarely found without gold, as is lead, and therefore, as far as it is present, it may be extracted again, but I deny that any profit is to be expected from this. Therefore, when they attempt to unite their red arsenical sulfur with the moon, it is an alchemical labor, just like the preceding ones. I willingly remain silent about the calamine stone, hematite, cobalt, Armenian stone, cerussite, smalt, talc, common sulfur, and so on, which all belong to the sophists and are certain signs of ignorance. I do not deny that it is impossible to extract our point from metallic subjects of mercurial nature, but I only say that the philosophers have their own proper subjects and undertake very different kinds of labor. On the contrary, the sophists grope in the darkness like the blind, now grasping one subject, now another, until at last their folly reaches its end and repentance takes its place. Then follows the usual excuse of fools, I did not think. Therefore, lest our alchemists be completely excluded from human society, they were eventually forced to seek something real, to correct their error with true natural truth, namely, the so-called fixation of volatile minerals. But since these same minerals did not seem sufficiently rich or palatable to them, they were not forgetful of adding a good portion of immature and volatile substance into the mature gold, asserting that they knew how to preserve not only the fixed from flight but also to fix the volatile in a few days. This mechanical process, though not without apparent reason, has up until now been plausible. Regarding the decision of this, it is noteworthy. 1. That maturation and conservation are different. It is well known to all metallurgists that arsenical, antimonial sulfur, etc., are voracious, and unless something is added in the fusion of minerals to satiate their greed, such as fusible stones, vitriolic salts, iron, quicklime, etc., they attack the very perfect metals and carry them off with them. Maturation, however, because it occurs through nature itself, specifically the astral sulfur acting in mercury, with the assistance of external regulated heat, cannot be completed in such a short time. Indeed, art assists nature through saline aids, which are contrary to sulfur. Nevertheless, it is not enough simply to remove sulfur and impurities from the mercurial part, it requires, above all, slow natural cooking, continuously for a long time. Thus, maturation or fixation, which proceeds at a slow pace, should not be rejected, as it is akin to nature, otherwise, it is not. Therefore, the more astute of our alchemists, after observing that little was accomplished through maturation, found that the true hunger for gold shadowed them, and they began to strive again for the summit of universal tincture, moving every stone by reading, studying, and laboring to command this great felicity. After consulting all authentic authors, they always observed the same refrain: they praised their mercury. Therefore, unwilling yet willing, they finally led the vulgar mercury to their own execution, since it provides the foundation and nature of all metals, as it alone is said to be allied with gold and closely connected to the philosophers in many other places. One must not speak of the suffering endured by this good mercury, unless it were a creature without equal, for it would have been impossible for it to emerge from such constant torture, for they inflicted more torments on it than Domitian, Decius, Nero, and Diocletian inflicted on their martyrs. However, whatever they did, adding or subtracting, it still refused to deny its faith, which was and is to impose upon the sophists and obey the philosophers. Their intention was to purify mercury through sublimations from false bodies, resolving, sublimating, reviving it, and so on, until it became whiter, sweeter, and without bitterness, so that it would dissolve the sun. Many, having heard that the principle of metals is viscous water, with the addition of spirits and other substances, prepared a similar mucilage. Not a few elevated it many times from the metals and thus purified it from blackness, and finally joined it with the sun. Some wished to create a special mercury from air, salts, certain vegetables, while others desired it from the very utopia. Others praised mercurial extractions made from precipitates with gold. Some reduced it to water, oil, salt, and so on, others exalted its fixations. In the end, all obtained useless precipitates, and mercury itself, the troublesome tormentor of alchemists. This tragedy has been played out in Europe up to our time, with many esteemed authors still living, granted only rudimentary gifts. From here, after so many illusions accepted from mercury, our sophists, in the years just past, convened and declared publicly that mercury, as a disturber of alchemical peace and a traitor to the country, should be deprived of all honor and subjected to exile. This was under the penalty that anyone who admitted mercury into their laboratory in any manner should be regarded as perjured and rebellious. This was accompanied by the beautiful yet irrational reasoning that it was absurd for a metal to generate a metal, and besides, all the philosophers expressly declare and convincingly demonstrate with the clearest reasoning that their mercury is not common. So that they might not be completely without mercury and contemplate eating bread without flour, they unanimously concluded that another, as a substitute for the exiled one, would suffice. After careful deliberation and application of the writings of the foremost authorities, especially Sendivogius, they solemnly elected Nitor, Saltpeter, for this royal office. The more learned among them immediately suggested through letters that their recently elected Mercury's assistant was a most noble substance, since it not only corresponded to the rejected Mercury in opposite qualities, but also could be fixed more quickly and easily. For nothing more is desired by these alchemists than fixed moon, fixed Mercury, and so on, and quickly too. Regarding its more secret properties and the soul, which is most deeply hidden, called the little bird of Hermes, they would gladly write much, but the dignity of the world prohibits it. The others all returned home and devised their processes, each according to their capacity. Many left their homeland and visited Germany, which they considered a foreign land for exaltation and a detriment to the locals. There, to this day, they corrode the sun with some prepared nitre and observe various colors, especially purple, with great consolation. Therefore, they know well that nitre is the subject from which mercury of the sophists must be prepared, but whether this union of sun and nitre, under the name of the universal or particular, should be sold to the princes is still a matter of controversy. Some think that this is the most universal path in the superlative degree, because nitre is found in all three kingdoms, and Paracelsus calls the material of the stone triple. 2. Because the philosophers, and especially Hermes, write that it is everywhere and carried by the wind, all of which corresponds only to nitre. Many make a connection with the purse, crumina, concluding that it deserves only the particular title, because it leaves only that part which was added and tinctured. But I ask your lordships, how can metal be extracted from salt, through art, in liquid glass? You answer, by adding metal. I agree, but I distinguish between metal that is genuinely opened and metal that is artificially corroded. If gold were radically opened in its nitrous liquor, then it would not be absurd to establish this, but it is already clear to beginners that gold is reduced to its first matter in its similar form. However, salts are not like metals, because they are entirely separated from them in nature, therefore. Let us suppose, however, that metal is made from niter, then I ask again, what kind of metal is it? Is it gold, or mercury? If you say gold, then gold is not dissolved by gold, nor does gold have more in its natural state and before regeneration than it needs for its existence. If you wish to say mercury, you are plainly lying, because you cannot force gold to change into mercury by physical means, and much less will you make the salts force it into the same state. Furthermore, it is absurd for a fixed body, by means of fire, to produce something volatile. As for what Sendivogius writes in his 12th treatise on niter, he did this for the benefit of the locals. He who is wise and experienced will not stumble upon these rocks. If our ancestors had wished to write only the bare and solitary truth, perhaps it would not have reached our time, because all the mysteries of nature could be inscribed on a single page. This good author was not concerned with the niter of the vegetable nature, but with the niter of the metallic nature, because they have a great affinity with each other, and pearls should not be thrown to pigs. For this reason he described it and understood it. Have you not read the same Sendivogius, who says that if you wish to make metal, your metal must be the beginning? From a dog, nothing but a dog is born. Also, do not work according to the letter, but always consider what is in accordance with nature and what is not, etc. As for Hermes, his entire emerald tablet is written under a veil of allegory and metaphor. There, the wind is understood, not that of the greater world, but of the smaller world, enclosed in glass. Therefore, beware of singing a palinode regarding offended Mercury in its metallic form, to your great confusion, for it is noble and born of a royal lineage, and for the great ones, it remains deeply hidden, if it suffers injury. But the sophists and the ignorant are often proud, and they cautiously avoid anything that might bring dishonor upon them. Therefore, since niter did not meet their expectations, they are now given other subjects in nature, in which they place equal or even greater hope, such as Tartarus. Moreover, they give instructions on subtle fixed salts or foliated earth, into which they direct the planting of gold, and additionally, it is derived from wine, according to Lullius. However, the rumor has spread that neither in this hunting expedition did they capture any prey, except the lost labor. Therefore, many sought alum, extracted sweet salt, and in the end, retained alum. Others, however, not unlearned, with great arrogance and presumption, attempted to find in the very elements what cannot be found in the elements. Therefore, from rainwater, falling in a continuous storm, and long putrefied under the sun, they separated subtle vinegar, which they then mixed with common fixed salt and oil of vitriol, dissolving the collected crystals, and finally coagulating them into tincture with pyrite, to the admiration of all, especially their own. As such a process was recommended to me by a learned Frenchman under a great sacrament, i.e., an oath, but was rejected by me. Others have invoked the dew of May, Magellan, in the spring, others snow, others virgin earth, as if freshly dug from the knees, others urine, human hair, and many other learned foolishnesses, and they obtained nothing. Therefore, I openly declare that all these subjects, except metals, which must however be philosophically anatomized, are deceptive, because they neither stand nor allow standing under the torture of fire. Therefore, anyone who chooses anything else as an adequate subject for transmutation, other than the permanent metallic moisture, is a pseudo-sophist and an impostor, unless they prove the contrary. Chapter 5. Now, let us proceed to the main subjects of the sophists, which again distinguishes them from the object of the true philosophers, who seek a single universal tincture. But they, not content with this, introduced infinite particulars, contrary to all reason and experience. Here, one promises a part with a part, another sells 2 pieces of gold from the moon's mark. Another sells den Zinsbar behind the ears every month. The fourth offers a fixed moon and its gradation, the fifth, the fixation of common sulfur, but desires an entry point. The sixth, the coagulation of Mercury into the sun, and so on. The seventh, the white Venus uniform. The eighth, the tincture of antimony sulfur in 2 months. The ninth, the fixation of Mercury into the moon. The 10th, the tincture of the sun with urine oil. The 11th, the conversion of Jupiter into the moon. The 12th, the bringing into the moon from Mars, and so on. Indeed, the polypus does not possess as many colors as these alchemists possess particularities. The cause of these wicked schemes is partly attributed to the magnates, the patrons, and partly to the physicists, the impostors. For the former are curious and impatient of delay, while the latter are shameless. Therefore, since the time for the tincture extends beyond a year and the nearest subject is unknown, they conclude as follows: if nothing happens, ignorance will harm us, we will see soon enough. The main charm for the particulars is the imagined brief labor and a gain that is not too envious. I confess, the intention is not bad, but the end is. To show how miserably the particularists are deceived, I inquire and say this: do the particular transmutations of metals occur in heterogeneous or homogeneous mercury? And further, are they achieved by way of maturation or tinctural illumination? If the particularists err, and in heterogeneous mercury, through the process of maturation, they lie most shamelessly like alchemists, because to mature and remain heterogeneous are incompatible in the metallic kingdom. For maturation occurs through cooking, and cooking unites similars and separates dissimilars. If they should accept that this is true regarding the simple maturation of nature, not of art. Answer: no matter how the art proceeds, it never produces true gold, which in its natural state is homogeneous and dissimilar. However, if this is granted, it is not true gold, nor does it withstand examination. If now that gold, created by the transmuting art, is similar to nature, it will also be homogeneous, and consequently, either it will be made through maturation by separating the heterogeneous, or through tinctural illumination, retaining them but altering them by the power of fermentation. They are therefore forced to admit that it is made either by artificial maturation or tinctural illumination. If the former, it is necessary that the lower metals are freed by their coagulants, and reduced into the mercurial nature, and purified and matured through cooking and the addition of other substances. Otherwise, external fire, such as the mercurial fire from the center, cannot draw down the celestial fire from potentiality into actuality, and thus maturation does not occur, due to the artisan's excessive observation of principles. For weak fire, such as that of maturation, only acts on bodies that are open, not closed. As to whether the true sages can accomplish this, I highly doubt it. However, I do know this well, that they cannot make mercury homogeneous, nor, indeed, many have never even dreamed that it is heterogeneous. They wish to produce the bodies of mercury, but are always hindered by other concerns. From this follows that no particular, in the common sense, is achievable, except for the tedious and prolonged maturation of certain minerals. The true particular is the imperfect tincture after the first rotation, which only converts a part of the impure metal into a purer form. And now, with regard to the object of the sophists, the end is the same for true philosophers and sophists, namely gold. However, it differs in this: the true philosophers possess it with honor and health, while the sophists, in desperation and insane sickness, lack it. Epilogue. Based on the foundations and solid proofs presented, I believe it is clear to the magnates what should be sought in the art of chemistry, and how the true philosopher compares, as well as what the sophists can bear and what they refuse to tolerate. If they read this treatise and carefully consider it, I promise them that they will not be deceived by any impostor, no matter how cunning. However, if they are already preoccupied with false opinions and refuse to accept the truth, they will lament internally and in their hearts, and will no longer hold the divine art in esteem, as they will be deprived of health and wealth by impostors. Whoever deals with something they do not understand, and do not wish to understand, if they are deceived regarding this matter, and frustrated in their goal, should not blame others, rather, they should place the blame on themselves. What difference does it make to a dishonest merchant if the buyer purchases goods that are spoiled by neglect? The laws are written for the vigilant, not the sleeping. Moreover, not all impostors act with intentional malice. Furthermore, the following argument is fallacious: I have spent so many years and resources on this study, have nourished so many sophists, but found nothing, therefore, the whole science is false. It is not valid to argue from our ignorance about the truth or falsehood of the matter. Therefore, anyone who wishes to possess the golden fleece in this spagyric or hermetic study must first learn to know its subject and object well, and then they will not be disappointed in their desires. The end.